Okay, hello and welcome to our weekly Wednesday night live stream. I am your host, Dana Morningstar, and this is a live stream that I try and do every Wednesday night at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and it runs, well, normally runs for about 3 hours. I don't know how long I'll be able to go tonight, so we'll just see. So if you are new here, welcome, and if you are returning here, welcome. How is everybody's week going? Anything new and exciting happening? Are you guys getting the notifications when I go live? I know YouTube uh, kind of goes rogue with that. Sometimes, a lot of the times, they don't give people the notifications. So, yeah, that's been an ongoing challenge. Cool. Angela, hello. She says, I did. Eartha says yes and hello. Welcome, welcome. Hey, Kevin. Nance says she just got a notification. Lori just got a notification. Okay, good to know. I'm glad that you guys are getting your notifications. Angela says, hi, Dana. Hope you're well. I am. Thank you for asking. I hope you are too. Jamie is here. So, are there any topics or, topics or subjects or things that you guys would like to discuss? UNA says, wow, you must have a lot of strength to do 2 live streams in one day. Wow, I'm impressed. Well, yes and no. So I just felt so bad last week that Angie and I had to cancel at such short notice. And I know that these live streams, that for some people it's their lifeline, and I get it. I've been there, and I really want to do better about making sure that there is a significant amount of notice given if we're going to as much notice as we possibly can give, if we're going to cancel or need to reschedule. And so I just wanted to make sure that we got our live stream, Angie and I's live stream, in this week for sure. So Jack is here. Hello. He says, I'm moving to my desktop shortly. Okay. Angela says, okay, how about on letting go? I hold on to my relationships even when they should end. I'll end it, but keep going back. And then my anxiety rises and I start having all these panic attacks. I guess, could you tell me a little bit more about the anxiety, and the panic attacks? Does that happen because you're going back, or does it happen when you're out of the relationship? One of the reasons in general people tend to hold on to relationships way past their expiration has to do with I think some might say like a more of an anxious style of attachment in general. So and our attachment styles, they're developed at a fairly young age. They are flexible, they can be changed, but they, kind of sets the stage for our relationships later on in life. So our initial attachment styles are with our primary caregiver, generally our mother. And when a child develops an anxious style of attachment, it's this constant uncertainty of, are their needs going to be met? There's no predictability, or there is predictability, but it's all on the parent's schedule. So the child might be hungry, but if the parent's like, no, no, I'm sorry, dinner time's at 6:30, you chose not to eat, so now you don't get to eat. That causes anxiety in the child because it's sort of like, well, I wasn't hungry then, but I am hungry now. And oh my gosh, I've got to wait, 12 hours until the morning. And that's just a small example, with that anxious style of attachment with just basic needs getting met. But when it comes to relationships, it's that same type of um, anxiety and panic of, okay, is this person, and generally the dynamic with the parent, it's the parent leaves. They may threaten to leave. They may threaten to I don't know, return the child to the stork, or um, drop them off somewhere. Maybe they just leave for hours on end and you don't know where they are. Or there's all kinds of kind of these like perceived or even actual abandonment issues that a child could go through. And it could be intentional, it could be unintentional. The parent might have a really erratic work schedule, but of course a 2 or 3 or even an 18-month-old doesn't realize that. To them, it's terrifying because they're not getting their needs met and they don't know when they're going to be met. So later on in life, when a person starts dating and they have this anxious style of attachment, it's that same kind of unhinged neediness with other people of, oh my gosh, please don't leave me. I'll do anything to make this relationship work. Something is better than nothing. So I think for a lot of people, that's a big part of it. Um, and the other big part of it is trauma bonds. It's these really intense bonds, these deeply unhealthy bonds that are formed between two people through the highs and lows of trauma. It's through the pain of trauma and then the relief of uh, non-trauma, or the relief of kind of the return to normal. And it creates this level of intensity. If you think about it, it's the difference between going through like a boot camp with somebody versus being in a book club with somebody. The level of connection and camaraderie in boot camp is significantly stronger, and that's why it's such an emotional roller coaster. And abusive or toxic relationships tend to have that same, the highs and lows, which is it can be very addictive. Yeah, Angela saying that. Yeah, I was neglected by my mom and physically abused by my dad. And I'm so sorry to hear that. That's so, um, yeah, it just sounds like you really went through it. My goodness. It's helpful. Like I mentioned, the good thing with attachment styles is that they are changeable. But just being aware of them is a big part of it. So realizing, oh my gosh, this is what's going on. I have this anxious style of attachment, and it's it's driving my behavior because of this unresolved anxiousness from before. And also because here's the challenge too with anxious style of attachment, it tends to be this kind of recreation of this pattern. So if a person's not able to be discerning and to be coming from a mindset of like, okay, I'm going to be focused on being choosy instead of being chosen. If we're always in that scramble to make that relationship work, we're going to find ourselves, ironically, continually abandoned and betrayed and abused and used time and time and time again. Whereas a person that has that more secure attachment style, they're going to leave this relationship. They're going to have um, uh, deal breakers and boundaries in place that they'll be able to realize, I don't need this, and then they leave. So, and it's not all secure people that are like this. Again, that secure attachment style can absolutely be manipulated and turned into more of an anxious style, because I think this stuff's not taught. And a lot of secure attachment type people, they're normal, decent people. They tend to assume the best in other people. They tend to have a relatively secure, stable childhood. They've never come across deep pathology like this. And if they have, they haven't been on the receiving end of it. So, but regardless, realizing, okay, this is what is a big motivating factor for my behavior, is this anxious style of attachment. And then noticing with other people, and this helps to notice kind of their attachment style too. A lot of times, uh, when we're continually getting hurt and staying with people that, use, abuse, lie, cheat, steal, do all these things, that's considered more of an avoidant um, attachment style. So they're not invested in the relationship. There is no emotional depth, and for whatever reason for them. And so, of course, that's absolutely heartbreaking for anybody, but kind of twice as much so for that anxious style of that anxious attached person, because they're in this scramble to try to make this relationship work when the other person's not even emotionally invested in it. So being aware of, is this is this other person even emotionally um, available? Or are they doing a bunch of distancing behaviors? When we can see this stuff kind of through this lens of attachment, it really makes an ocean of difference. When you realize, oh my gosh, this person um, lies about little things and big things. They have a long-standing pattern of cheating. They shut down if they get confronted. They can't work as a team. All of this kind of stuff is distancing behavior, and there is no emotional availability to be a couple with somebody like that. So unless they're actively willing to work on their attachment style, but most avoidant people aren't, because that's what makes them feel, that's how they get security, is by distancing themselves. Whereas the anxious person gets security by scrambling and holding on to the relationship. Does that make sense? Okay, let's see. Yeah, Angela saying, yeah, wow, I've never been the one to choose. I let people choose me. Yes. And so that's a big part of that anxious style of attachment. It also goes hand in hand with people pleasing behavior, and very poor to no boundaries, and a very kind of unstable sense of self. So it's sort of like, I'll change. It's like a social chameleon. Like, I'll kind of be whatever you need me to be, just don't leave me. And I'm not saying that that's a necessarily like a manipulative trait. It could act, within reason, it can be a very uh, beneficial skill to be able to blend in and converse with, you know, many different types of people. But if it's coming from a place of that constant need of validation and approval from others, then it becomes a problem. Because then what we're doing is subconsciously we're silencing or shaving off parts of ourselves that the other person doesn't like. You see this a lot. Probably the best example, you see this a lot in high school, where you've got very clearly defined cliques, or at least you did back in my day, very clearly defined cliques of kids. And if something wasn't cool, and of course things change a lot when you're in high school, right? So like it could just be that week, all of a sudden that thing is no longer cool. And anybody in the group who's doing it is either ostracized, or, you know, or they immediately stop doing it. It could be listening to type of music. It could be wearing a certain type of tennis shoe or whatever. Um, so people that are trying to fit in so hard are very quick to get rid of those wants and needs and thoughts and feelings that other people don't approve of. And, that can be a problem. The result long term is that a person can really feel like, gosh, they can become so disconnected from their wants and needs and thoughts and feelings that they don't know who they are, that they're a stranger to themselves. Um, That's interesting, Grace. Says, why do I feel shame around something is better than nothing? What does a healthy feeling about that look like? Can you elaborate a little bit more on that as far as shame? So, and maybe give me an example. So, is it the thinking of I should be grateful for what I have kind of thing, that something is better than nothing, and then feeling guilt um, about crumbs not being enough? Is that what you're describing, or am I off base with that? Angela saying, "Oh my gosh, yes, Dana, I wear different faces with different people." And realize too, we all do to some extent. Who I am with my brother is very different than who I am with you guys, uh, or with my mother, or um, so we're different. There's different groups of people or different types of people in different situations and circumstances bring out different sides of ourselves. But when these different sides are so radically different and they're not really authentic, they're more created in hopes of, um, I hope they'll like me. Like, okay, the movie character that comes to mind in this is, if you've ever seen the movie The Devil Wears Prada. um oh, I forget her name, the gal that's interning in the movie. uh she goes to work for, who is it, Glenn Close. And is that right? Do I have that right character? That doesn't sound right to me. Great movie. And so she starts becoming this fashionista to fit in, but that's not really who she is. But then, like, I don't know. And then later on, that kind of does become who she is. But for a while there, it's not who she is. It's that level of disconnect of feeling, like, oh, okay, I need to be this person that other people think I need to be, and hiding our true interests. Let's see. Um. Oh, it looks like we had an issue, a troll. I don't know. Something was going on. I totally missed that. Okay, I'll try to keep my eyes open for stuff. Let's see here. Grace says, Dana, I feel like you're reading a book on my past relationships. How do we get out of avoidant behavior? I have next to zero relationships. I both do and don't want any, and I know that's avoidant. So, yes, and I will tell you, uh, when I started learning about different attachment styles and everything, it really rattled me, because I'm like, man, I think I'm avoidant. But I kept hearing all of these things of, oh, it's narcissists and sociopaths and psychopaths of the world that tend to be avoidant. And that's true, but not all avoidant people, um, are deeply pathological. It can be that level of avoidant. It's common after you've been through something traumatic and you've been hurt. Our natural human instinct is to withdraw from, um, withdraw from others and withdraw into ourselves, because we kind of become the only safe space, um, especially when we don't know how when we're struggling with how to trust other people, and when we're struggling with even trusting our own judgment. So I can completely relate to this, to where you are. In terms of how do we overcome being avoidant, a lot of that has to do with having a safe, secure relationship with somebody. So ideally, somebody that's proven themselves to have some degree of emotional safety there. This might be a therapist. It might be a friend. If it's not, um, if you don't have either of those in your life, then kind of pulling it way back and connecting, and then really focusing on cultivating emotional safety, which is something that we all should be doing in every relationship, but focus on that cultivating emotional safety with a person to the degree that it's been earned. So let's say if you did meet somebody, I don't know, it's pandemic time, so it's kind of a strange time to be meeting people, but let's say you were to, I don't know, go to like a yoga class or something, and you were to meet somebody and you kind of hit it off. Uh, to start to just, it's moving slowly and building up that emotional trust. Um, it really does help. A lot of it really, it just stems from knowing your attachment style, and then knowing what kind of when it's um, triggered, like when it's activated, and then different ways that we go about deactivating it or retreating back into safety. So, for example, an avoidant person, um, we tend to be very quick to be like, nope, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. And they can be very rigid, and it's self-protective. It's, if I even catch a whiff of anything that could potentially hurt me, drama, conflict, that this is probably a very valid point. There's a difference between like drama and crazy making and conflict and confrontation. So any authentic relationship is going to have confrontation, and I'm not saying confrontation in like a hostile way. I'm saying it in a like a healthy, tactful way of, hey, I don't agree with that, or that's interesting, that's so different from what I think, like tell me more about why you think that. It's because two people are going to be different. But with an avoidant person, any type of conflict or confrontation can register um, as yikes, like warning Will Robinson kind of a thing. Like, I need to get out of here. I don't like this. I don't like having my environment. Um, I don't like tension at all. So maybe they leave. So changing that is being aware of different times that attachment style surfaces, like when it is activated and what that feels like. So for me, for example, when that's my internal alarms tend to go off whenever there's a disagreement of any kind, conflict or confrontation. It makes me really anxious, and my initial reaction is I just want to get out of here. And it's taken me a very, very long time to get to the place of realizing that this is normal and healthy to have disagreements with people. It's how they're handled that makes all of the difference. And and something else that I've really come to fully believe is it makes an ocean of difference if you're in a friendship or especially a relationship, for that person to be have a very growth oriented mindset. So be open to personal growth kind of topics. If they're not open to this, if they think it's, oh, I don't want to talk about my emotions, I don't want to talk about this, that they're shutting things down, they're spinning, they're blaming, they're doing all this kind of stuff, then it's that's not creating emotional safety, and it's definitely not going to be conducive for either an anxious or an avoidant attachment style. Because avoidants are like, okay, I'm out. And anxious people tend to be like, oh, no, I'll do whatever it takes to make it work. And I'll, here's gifts and here's people, please, whatever you want. Just, I don't even know what I did, but just please forgive me, kind of a thing. So knowing when your attachment style is activated, what that feels like, which for both the avoidant and anxious person tends to be panic, uh, to a pretty significant degree. Whereas a secure person, they don't bat an eye. So if there's a disagreement, they're not thinking, oh my gosh, this relationship is over. I knew it. It was too good to be true. They're not planning their escape, or they're not losing sleep over the relationship ending. That's not even on their radar. They just think, oh wow, there's a disagreement. Okay, well, look, we'll figure it out. We'll talk through it. No big deal. So, yeah, but a lot of it has to do with cultivating relationships, seeing attachment styles in other people as well, and asking yourself, is this other person emotionally available? Do they come across as secure, anxious, or avoidant? And sometimes that can take a little while to really discern the difference. This is where it can be tricky. Some people tend to be more textbook than others. So, for example, um, my the two sociopathic men that I was involved with years ago, had you guys met them, you would have thought that both of them had a secure attachment style. They were very easygoing, very friendly. They seemed to communicate wonderfully, uh, likable. Um, you know, there were no immediate red flags. It wasn't until you kind of began to get to know them that things didn't add up, and the lies started surfacing, and um, just things didn't add, like major things didn't add up. So even though they came across as secure, of course, hindsight being what it is, I can look back on that and say, wow, all of that was avoidant behavior. They're both pathological liars. There is no um, relationship, there is no authentic relationship present or possible if you've got one person who's a pathological liar. I mean, that's a zero-sum game right there. So kind of seeing problematic behavior, I guess, for what it is, and um, yeah, moving slow. Okay, let me scroll down here. Truth Seeker says, I'm constantly relearning having my boundaries tripwired before I realize it. Psychic sucker punches. Yuck. Interesting. I like that phrase. Psychic sucker punches. Yeah, it's so true. It's difficult. I think it's always difficult to some degree to have our boundaries um, to feel so reactive, and that it is like a tripwire with when we're triggered or when we're activated. The flip side to that is that it can bring those extreme reactions, let us know where healing needs to happen. It can be difficult to give ourselves compassion or to approach that pain with kind of that uh, loving, compassionate kind of mindset of curiosity at the time. Especially if we're so reactive, we act in a way that's so not in alignment with the kind of person we are or that we want to be. It can really catch us off guard. It can catch others off guard. But just realizing, okay, like that extreme reaction, that's a sign that there's more there, and that there's something that needs to be healed. Let's see. The Beauty Within says, why does it seem like the narcissist is really doing well with that new supply? I thought at times it was really me. Like, what a mind trip. Yeah. And again, hopefully if you can see their behavior through these different attachment style principles, it can kind of give you some peace of mind. and realizing this is not an on-off switch. Like, this requires work. It requires self-awareness, and it requires accountability. It requires doing the work of actively identifying what our attachment style is, you know, kind of what tends to set it off, and what we do, how we can uh, work to change it to be more secure. If you're thinking about your ex and you're like, okay, gosh, this person was, they were dismissive, they were invalidating, they were constantly critical, they had all of this basically distancing behavior. They had this very avoidant um, style of attack. And let me just clarify too, because I don't want people getting this confused. Again, not every person with an avoidant attachment style is abusive. It's a big spectrum. There's lots of trauma survivors out there who uh, have gone through not even necessarily abuse, just something really traumatic, and are just really shut down and disconnected. So, so when I talk about like your ex's behavior, I'm kind of making some assumptions here that may or may not be correct, just based off of kind of what brings a lot of us together. So in terms of like verbal and emotional abuse, all of that's very distancing type behavior. If you can see it as, boy, this is this very avoidant style, um, avoidant style of attachment, that's not going to change based on who they're in a relationship with. It requires significantly more than that for all of us, but especially for avoidant people. Because like I said, avoidants are the ones that tend to not be interested in connecting at a deep level with others, or at a more pathological end, they have a complete lack of self-awareness, and they always think it's the other person's problem. So it's, um, he might have moved on. When you see somebody move on and they're in this uh, idealized, is what we call it, this idealized stage of a relationship, that's exactly what it is. It's this infatuation, idealized, cloud nine, rose colored glasses stage. All relationships go through this. And, but there comes a point where that stage then um, begins to become more of a, uh, more mature. The relationship actually begins to take root, and that's when that negotiation phase takes in, when or kicks in, is when people start being more authentic, and they're having disagreements, and they're speaking their opinions, and they're starting to really show their true colors. That's when the relationship really starts, not the idealized stage. So don't confuse the idealized stage with your ex living happily ever after, or that you know um I guess it's just, it's ideal, and that's all it is, and it's not real. Okay, let me scroll up. Okay, Marie has a question. And she's on her phone. Let's see. Cha cha cha. Um, okay, I don't see a question from Marie, so I don't know. Jack, can you set me straight on that if I'm missing it? And Truth Seeker is saying confusion is the first red flag of abuse. I don't do confusion. Yes. Angie and I were talking a lot about different red flags today in our earlier live stream. And one of the things that I was mentioning about that is um, kind of the realization that we don't have to to have that concrete proof that confusion is enough. Like, that's a problem. So regardless of what the confusion is about, like, we don't need to find out for sure. Is this person cheating? Is this what's going on? Da, 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 da. Why are they doing this? Is it them or is it me? If there's an issue, if there's confusion, if there's mental anguish, if there's any type of emotional discomfort in a relationship, it's worth addressing. And if you're in a relationship with a person who's kind of emotionally healthy enough, they're going in, they have decent enough communication skills, then these issues that are brought up will be able to be resolved, like addressed and then resolved. But if there's confusion in the relationship and you bring it up and all you're encountering is them stonewalling, them withdrawing, them shutting you down, them becoming hostile, them spinning the script, and then all of a sudden you find yourself defending your behavior. If things just go way off track, then that's that's enough of a problem. It doesn't matter if they're lying, cheating, stealing, whatever. The fact that there is no effective communication possible is huge. That's a huge, huge problem. And frankly, the relationship gets shoved into neutral when that happens. It stops growing. So at that point, there really isn't a relationship. There's just a holding pattern that two people are in, because now there's not that emotional safety present. There's the what should be emotional safety is replaced by confusion and resentment and frustration. And those, once that happens, those start to take root and then they grow. And the only way to get rid of them is to address them and with open, honest, sincere, solutions oriented communication and actually get them resolved. So, okay. Yes, Embers, this is a really great point. She says, I must be avoidant since I never had a fight with any boyfriend or fiance before my ex-husband. He couldn't believe that I'd never fought before him. That's a great sign of avoidant behavior. Yes. So that kind of behavior can come across in two ways, right? It's either pushing somebody away. It's either more um, of a like active type of avoidance, you know, um, yeah, just active avoidance, like abusive type of aggressive type behavior, or it's that withdrawing and that extreme people pleasing. And um, like, okay, I'm just going to avoid conflict altogether with the unintended consequence. And here, in for an avoidant person, they might think, like for me, I did the same thing. I for years thought, oh, I'm just very go with the flow. And yeah, I was, but to a problematic degree. So, and there, because I was so quote unquote go with the flow, there was no relationships of any substance that really developed because I never asserted myself because I wasn't comfortable with confrontation or on at any level, and I didn't realize it. So the result, I just sucked up a lot of things and pretended like things weren't a big deal and became used to living in with friendships and relationships that were very, very uncomfortable. And I oftentimes didn't realize how uncomfortable they were until things got so bad that these relationships ended. Usually, usually it was me exploding and being like, I can't handle this anymore, you know? So, uh, yeah. And a lot of people have a hard time understanding that. And because there is this idea that with relationships, that, oh, kind of, um, it's a good thing if couples don't fight. And again, there's a difference between disagreeing and fighting. So it's normal and healthy and appropriate for people to disagree. I want to have Chinese for dinner. You want to have Mexican. I want to watch the news. You want to watch I don't know, America's Next Top Model, right? Like there's gonna be differences between people. That's part of it. There's gonna be disagreements, but fighting it is not necessary. If you're in a relationship and there is that, uh, complete absence of conflict to that mild degree where there's even disagreements, if there's that complete absence of conflict, healthy conflict especially, then this isn't a sign of a healthy relationship, it's a sign of poor communication. And that can absolutely be a game changer when we view it that way of, "Oh my gosh, this," I mean, it can be life-changing. So, yeah, definitely worth thinking about, like, how asking yourself, "How do you show up in a relationship regardless of your attachment style? How comfortable are you with, asserting yourself? And are you able to do it tactfully? Or do you tend to just kind of quote unquote go with the flow and just stuff things deep down and pretend like everything's okay and then resort to passive aggressive or aggressive behavior? Being very aware of this is, like I said, it can just be absolutely game changing. Mike was saying, yeah, toxic people love to confuse people. Yes. And I think too in large part it's because I don't think it's how they're comfortable interacting. So there it takes a great deal of self-assurance and comfort to show up, and it's weird, right? Like to show up and be ourselves. Like just to be like, yeah, I totally own it. Like these are my wants, these are my needs, these are my likes, these are my dislikes. Like this is who I am. Um, and I'm okay with that. And I don't need approval or validation from others. Like this is just who I am. That can make that, and it does make a lot of people very uncomfortable because that's not how we're really socialized. And so with a lot of more of aggressively toxic people, they've gone through life probably because they also grew up in a home where needs were met with yelling and screaming and fighting and drugs and alcohol and chaos and half truths and total lies and all kinds of blurred boundaries and just chaos. And so that's kind of what they know. And maybe to some extent they're like, gosh, that's toxic, right? They might even say, oh yeah, my mom's totally toxic or whatever, whoever his family member is totally toxic, but they might not see it in themselves. We we all tend to kind of be, it's like the saying goes, the last thing the fish notices is the water. When we're around the environment that we're in seems normal to all of us. And so we don't realize that it's we're not even aware of it and until we're made aware of something different. If you place a freshwater fish in a saltwater tank, very quickly they're going to become aware that their environment's changed and it's probably going to kill them. People can have that same level of kind of shell shock from um, or just shock in general, when they're transplanted from one environment to the other, because it's a totally different way of going about things. If you take a reasonably, um, kind of, I don't know, a person with functional coping skills and place them with people that don't have coping skills, it's 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 so different. People, they're just so different. Um, for both types of people. Because the people that have functional coping skills, they don't have like the stress and the anxiety, and they don't have all of the things that the people with um, uh, kind of damaged or ineffective coping skills are struggling with. They don't have that. And the people with ineffective coping skills, they're going about meeting their needs and coping in the ways that they know how, in the best way that they know how. And the best way that they might know how is with drugs or alcohol or sex or food or shopping or um, screaming or yelling or threatening or what have you. So I think it's important to see problematic behavior, like dysfunctional. If you think about behavior in terms of like functional or dysfunctional, not functional, if you see not functional behavior i- as what it is, like dysfunctional behavior is present because functional behavior isn't. If functional behavior was present and it was possible, because when you have functional behavior, it's the shortest way to from point A to point B. It's very simple, it's very easy, it's non-issues. So when people are going this long, convoluted, roundabout way of meeting their needs, they're doing that because they don't know how to get from point A to point B. So there's I guess if you can see it that way, it can kind of help to realize, okay, it's not just that they're being incredibly difficult, is this is how they've probably always gone about relating to other people, communicating their frustration, handling anger, whatever it might be. This has nothing to do with you. You just happen to be, kind of got caught up in the storm that was their behavior at a certain time, you know? And didn't start with you, it's not gonna end with you, it's on them, and they're gonna take that behavior with them until there comes a point when they realize they need to learn new skills to do something different. Okay, let's see. Let me scroll, scroll, scroll. Um, let's see. Scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. Elizabeth was saying, she's like, I feel abused by my mom, but she's older, so I just let it go. And there's a couple different ways we can kind of respond to that behavior. So it's a lot easier to, if the decision is, you know what, okay, she's old, um, I'm gonna have the best boundaries I can at this point. I still want to have communication open with her, or I need communication open with her for whatever reason. There's no judgment. That's Everybody's got their own decisions to make with that. Uh, but if you're able to separate it and to see her behavior as her bad behavior instead of internalizing it and seeing it, um, and letting that harshness in. If you can see it as, okay, her behavior is a reflection of whatever's going on with her. Normal, happy, healthy, well-adjusted people don't go around trying to destroy other people. So, um, you know, she might be say you can it's one thing to have your feelings hurt. Sometimes that's gonna happen when a person's being hateful or hurtful, um, to have our feelings hurt, but we don't have to let it negatively impact our self-worth. So making that distinction to yourself, like, here's an example of some, emotional distancing. So back when I was a nurse, and there were times where I worked with, gosh, way back in the day, um, with patients that had dementia or Alzheimer's or different types of cognitive challenges, brain injuries, um, things that radically could change and did change a person's behavior, and you didn't know what you were walking into from day to day, from moment to moment. Even sometimes it could be a person was very quiet, or sometimes they were screaming and yelling. Sometimes they were laughing, sometimes they were crying, sometimes they would become very belligerent, sometimes they'd become very accusatory. Uh, and and that could, really feel harsh if you have a patient that you really care for, and all of a sudden they're accusing you of stealing or of hiding under their bed at night, or and it's just it's part of what's going on with them cognitively. Um, and then kind of realizing that it helps to just disconnect and realize, okay, this isn't me. I don't need to stand here. It's not going to help to try to like defend myself and be like, no, I swear I was in bed last night at 2 a.m. I promise you I was not hiding under your bed. It's 97 degrees in your room. Like of all the places that I would be on a Friday night, I promise you it's not going to be, under there's no point in even having this conversation, because then you're trying to be rational with an irrational person. And realizing, okay, this is just this I am encountering this person's limitations, and this isn't a reflection of me. And I can approach this with kind of compassion, and um, you just kind of smile and nod, and then that's it. And then you go on with your day, and you don't let that you don't let it in. Okay, let me scroll up here. Jack says, Dana, I'm trying to get messages to you, but the pacing is just off. I will keep trying. Um, let's see here. Right. UA says, yeah, the silent treatment always reminded me of a childish tactic, like a little child who is having a silent tantrum. It's not a good look on an adult. Yep, I agree. And for a lot of people, they don't, again, they don't know um, how to do things differently. It's amazing how much programming we all have that's problematic. We picked it up along the way, maybe out of that's what we saw from our parents or our friends' parents, or maybe it was kind of our way to survive elementary school or high school, or whatever. We learned these kind of maladaptive uh, uh, ways to get our needs met in the moment, right? Like, oh, okay, I don't want to face consequences, so I'll lie, or I don't want to. I don't know. There's all kinds of irrational thinking and behaving that can happen. I'm frustrated, so I'm just not gonna. I'll teach you, right? I'm gonna do silent treatment, and that's my way of. It's like little kids. Little kids hold their breath, right? Or some do. I'm upset, and I'm gonna teach you. I'm gonna hold my breath until I turn purple, and then you'll be sorry. It's you know scary, but manipulative. Princess Vava says, what is the best way to deal with a covert narcissistic mother? I would say the same way that you deal with everybody else. And it's really being grounded in your boundaries with with where your lines are for stuff. And at the same time, kind of balancing that acceptance of, if this is how she is, and if she's at the and, again, most people are not motivated to change their behavior. I think it's probably a very small percentage of the population that, uh, is even interested in, for sure, doing, like, a major overhaul of their behavior, but even, like, small changes. Most people, it takes a lot of time of their life not working for them, and a lot of insight and introspection of realizing, if their behavior is playing a part in that, for them to actually change. So knowing that, if your mom doesn't have any of that awareness, and her behavior is hateful or hurtful, then accepting, this is where she's at in life, and I'm not going to change her, because she has to be the one that wants the change. So I'm going to um, quit expecting things to be different than they are. I'm going to quit expecting reality to be anything other than what it is. And that's what acceptance is. Acceptance isn't saying that you're somehow at peace with what's going on, or that you're okay with it, or that you're going to just let her, you know, run wild in your home like a bull in a china shop. It doesn't mean any of that. It means, okay, this is her behavior. This is just how she is. So, therefore, when you interact with her, it's going to be from a place of um, anticipation and preparation. Okay, these are the things that mom does. It drives me up a wall. I'm going to go ahead and kind of keep these parameters in mind for when we make plans or when I spend time with her. You know, and to realize, okay, this is what she does, and then to quit being surprised by it. And if anything, to get to the place where you're surprised if she doesn't act that way. So there's a lot of inner peace that comes from that acceptance of who a person is, including ourselves, like who everybody is in that moment, and just realizing we're all acting. Um, Really, more often than not, we're all acting from a place of either our strengths or our limitations. And that's the best that we can do at the time. And for some people, it's really sad, like the damage that they do because they don't know. They're so driven by, you know, anger and envy and jealousy and rage and all of these awful emotions. Uh, they're destroying their own life and they don't even realize it. Yeah. Truth Seeker says, I don't do confusion, ad hominems, double speak, silent treatment, or dog whistling. Yes, I would agree with that. Not a fan of logical fallacies in general because they're logical fallacies, right? Because they don't make any sense. They're not factual. And I covered a little bit of this in my book, The Narcissist Playbook. If you're not familiar with logical fallacies, and if you're interested in it, that chapter in the book might be worth checking out. But it's it's basically all of the different ways that conversations get tangled up and stay off topic and unresolved. So it's interesting when you start looking up um, logical fallacies and what they are. And then, of course, examining your own behavior, being like, okay, well, what have I either gotten hooked on by other people, or have I fallen into this? And if so, which ones do I tend to fall into? You know? So it's interesting. Interesting stuff. Okay. Let me scroll up because I think poor Jack is trying to get my attention and I keep missing him. Yeah. Truth Seeker says you can tell who is a healthy communicator by who doesn't use ad hominems and logical in the rest of them. And there's a pretty extensive list of logical fallacies. There's I think one that a lot of people tend to encounter is appeal to authority. So it's the logical fallacy of uh, basically, well, I'm right because I'm an authority, or this person's right because they're an authority. When in reality, it's if something is factual, the facts should be able to stand on their own and not behind a person's title or position. So just because I was a nurse doesn't make me the end all be all authority on everything nursing. Right? Or just a lot of people have mental health professionals who, or teachers or whoever well, here's an example. The I'm drawing a blank on her name. The gal who wrote the book Romancing the Stone. If you guys are over the age of 40, you might remember this movie. Fantastic movie, Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner. Um, cute movie. Anyways, the gal who wrote that movie, um, was in a writing class in college, and her writing professor told her that she had no talent and that she should stop writing. And so she thought, well, I here's a person with a PhD in writing telling her that she just needs to hang it up. And so she did. And she didn't write for something like, I don't even know, close to 20 years. And then one day she couldn't suppress the urge anymore and she began writing. So that's a really sad, tragic example of the damage that these logical fallacies can do. So just because a person has maybe credibility in a field doesn't mean that um, they're necessarily correct. I'm trying to think of some other logical fallacies. There's so many. Red herring, um, straw man, appeal to nature. The appeal to nature is sort of like, oh, it's from nature, therefore it's better, which isn't always true. I don't. It's interesting. Interesting how we all can fall into those fallacies. Okay. Mm, Grace saying, okay, Dana, thanks for explaining like the different attachment styles. She says, I was avoidant to a toxic degree. Thank you for staying in this subject for a bit. Yes, no problem. I think there's a lot of people that have experienced trauma, especially abuse, or like relationship abuse, um, that as a result tend to become avoidant and they stay there and they don't realize that this um, that this is what's going on, and their world just becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. It's really sad. And like I said, I get it. I've been there. I still struggle with that. Uh, it helps. There's, um, I'm drawing a blank on her. There's a YouTuber who I don't know if she talks about this necessarily in terms of like attachment styles, but she talks about it in terms of kind of like who's driving the ship, like who's steering the boat, in terms of our different inner selves. So is our adult self front and present, or is it our child self? It's really fascinating when you can start observing your own behavior like this and realize, oh my gosh, I fell out of the adult chair. The adult me is not there. It's the child. The scared, wounded child is now steering the boat. And the scared, wounded child tends to seek it's that instant gratification or instant kind of soothing of their needs. It tends to be erratic and impulsive and fear-based, um, and very kind of irrational, basically. So, for example, let's put this in context. You have a person that has an avoidant attachment style, and they're, um, well, they could have either anxious or avoidant. Okay. So, more of maybe like a fearful avoidant type versus a dismissive avoidant. Like, dismissive avoidants aren't interested at all in relationships. Fearful avoidant is like, I'm interested, but I'm terrified you're going to hurt me, kind of a thing. So they tend to just they default to being avoidant. Um, every now and again, they kind of maybe start sniffing around a relationship or a friendship, but then any little sudden move, uh, they're quick to retreat. So if in a relationship and their partner, I don't doesn't call, they don't hear from their partner, or something out of the ordinary and potentially upsetting happens, they immediately fall out of that adult chair, and now the child is sitting in there, and the child is like, "Oh my gosh, well, this relationship's not gonna work, and I just knew it wasn't gonna work, and I knew that they weren't right for me anyhow, and I'm just gonna leave, and I don't need this, and who do they think they are anyhow?" And it's all of that kind of, "I'll pack up my marbles and go," kinda thing. It's the "I'll leave you before you can leave me" behavior, and, um it can be it can be very, very difficult 'cause that attachment style can be very easily, and it often is, very easily activated. Um, it can be done in ways that are, maybe obvious, maybe ways that are not so obvious. If there's unhealed pain, um, let's say that person, your partner's doing something that a parent, the same type of behavior that a parent did, and that parent's behavior hurt you. Uh, even though, like, let's say, for example, you had a parent who, um, every time they canceled or somehow let you down, they would bring home pizza as a way of making it up to you. And you got to the point where you knew if you saw them coming home and they had pizza with them that they weren't going to show up to your play, or that, um, they were good, that you're going to be let down again. And let's say now fast forward 30 years and you're dating somebody and it's Friday night and you happen to see them walking up the driveway bringing a pizza. It can all of a sudden just kind of that emotional flood of, "Oh my gosh, what are they gonna do? Like, what did I do wrong? And are they not gonna attend my sister's wedding? And how am I gonna explain this?" And then there's just this irrational behavior kicks in. And it can be difficult to slow it down and see it in the moment. Oftentimes these things, it's more after the fact. Generally, because the other person is like, they walk in and they have pizza and they're like, "Hey, Friday night pizza," and then you're like, you're climbing the walls because 'cause you're so upset. And they're like, "What is the matter with you?" Um, and then you kinda realize, "Oh my gosh, maybe, like, yeah, maybe this is, unprocessed stuff, and I do need to address this." So, having a another person, this is where it goes back to that ability, that importance for a relationship to be growth oriented. So, um, because we are all works in process, right? There's always room for improvement, and it can people can feel, especially after abuse or neglect, they can feel deeply damaged, like broken goods. Like, okay, I'm just not going to be able to have a good relationship. My parents didn't have a good relationship. My ex was horrible to me. I'm just not gonna. I'm kind of doomed to wander the earth alone, kind of feeling. But the reality is, if you can find somebody that is emotionally available enough, and they have that growth oriented mindset enough, and they're able to cultivate and maintain that level of emotional safety where you can share things with them and vice versa, they can share things with you. And um, it's at that friend level of, there's that deep care and concern about that other person. There isn't this like shaming, blaming, putting down. It's, if they're saying, okay, this is really difficult for me, like I have some, um, I get triggered or activated kind of during these times, and they're able to take that seriously and give and see what that means, have that empathy and see what that means for you of, wow, okay. Um, maybe they're uh, afraid of the dark, or they're afraid of being home alone. And if it's not a big deal to you, realizing but it's a big deal to them. And so giving when somebody's opening up and sharing kind of their vulnerabilities or their insecurities is probably a better way to say it. When they're sharing their insecurities, realizing this is it's such an honor, really, to get to know another person at that level of authenticity of, "Wow, thank you so much for trusting me with that," And, um, that's how that emotional trust is and then, of course, taking the actions, right? So then you're even if you're in especially when you're fighting, that you're not doing, damaging things like, "Okay, well, now that I know this person's afraid of the dark, if we're fighting, I'm gonna, uh, flip the lights off on my way out of the room." Like, that'll send everything straight back to square one, and then there's gonna be all kinds of trust that needs to be rebuilt. But kind of knowing who's in the driver's seat. Is it the adult you or is it the child you? The adult you is it's more grounded, kind of more self-assured, like, "I can handle this." You have a pretty good balance and understanding of your strengths and weaknesses. You're able there's like a reasonable degree of coping. You realize, okay, maybe there's certain issues that come up, and you're like, I need help. The adult you is able to to get your needs met in like an effective way, whereas the child you just uh, tends to fall apart, or just does not know how to handle things well because they handle things like a child, and that's how kids handle things, and that's completely reasonable and appropriate for a child to handle things like a child. But it doesn't work so well when we're an adult and we realize, "Oh my gosh, I've had the child, driving the bus here and not with relationships, and I've never realized it." So, interesting, yeah, interesting stuff. Okay, let me scroll down here. Huffle Mom says, uh, I have I have certain toppings I like on a pizza, but I'll eat almost any pizza you put in front of me. So far, there isn't a flavor of ice cream I've met that I haven't liked. That's funny. Oh, Jack says he likes this is very off topic here. He likes the Hawaiian pizza, pineapple, ham, and jalapeno slices. Jack, I also like pineapple and jalapeno pizza. I know that's absolute uh, heresy for so many people out there, but it is delicious. We all must be very hungry. There's a lot of pizza discussion going on in the chat. Oh, I'm so sorry, Jack. He says that his moderator abilities are getting stretched thin here. Okay, it looks like Renee has a question. Let me scroll up. Oh, yeah, it's not a book. Renee says, what is the name of the book with the child and adult responses? I came in late. It's not a book. It's uh, oh, her name is Michelle Shafton, uh, on YouTube, and I absolutely adore her. And I want to say, um, you might also want to look up like the adult chair, I think is her website, or it might even be her channel name. And her last name, it's CHALFANT, maybe something close to that. It's Michelle, Michelle C. The adult chair. Great, great, great stuff. Okay, let's see. Huffle you had mentioned, interestingly enough, weird timing on this. I had mentioned in the live stream earlier today about the book we read for book club. It was a while, I don't know, it was few a few book club books back on Oh, it was, what is it called? Loving yourself, like, love yourself like your life depends on it. And that book really resonated with Hufflemom and with Jack. And I was actually thinking about you this morning, Hufflemom, and that book. Um, so for a couple different reasons, this is off top. Just we're just gonna go with it, okay? Just go with me here. Um, so a couple different things. So I watched the Mr. Rogers movie with Tom Hanks a few nights ago. Tom Hanks is just so talented. I mean, y- like, what, and water is wet, right? Like we all know. Anyways, but does such a wonderful job in that movie. And there's a scene in it where the reporter, this guy that's interviewing him for this magazine, journalist, interviewing him for this magazine is, uh, um, so Mr. Rogers is giving this guy all of this time. And and the guy is kind of feeling like, okay, well, I don't want to keep you, and I just kind of want to ask you some questions. And he's trying to just get his interview done. And Mr. Rogers makes this comment about kind of like the most important. Oh, no, no, what? There was a child, like a Make-A-Wish. There's a very, like, a terminally ill child who was there visiting Mr. Rogers, and then the whole show was late being filmed because of Mr. Rogers was taking this time with his child. And he was explaining to the journalist about how kind of everything he does from moment to moment is the most important thing at that time. And so he was telling the journalist, he's like, well, I forget the journalist's name, Roy or whatever. Roy, the most important thing I'm doing right now is talking to you. And that just resonated with me s- uh, in several different ways. Um, First, what a beautiful way to live our life, right? Moment to moment, like, well, this is just the most important thing that I'm doing right now. I'm playing with the dog, or I'm interacting with my significant other, or I'm even doing the dishes, just whatever it is. This is the most important thing I'm doing right now. And that's a good thing. You're just living your life, and you're kind of bringing this level of like love and enjoyment to every moment. And so as I was kind of thinking about this whole scene in the movie, realizing that I struggle with this so much, and I tend to really get caught up in kind of what's next, what's next, what's next, and like putting my life on hold, like waiting to live my life. And I can be so hard on myself, if I oversleep, if I f- forget things, if I, whatever. And it's just this, it can be this constant chastising of myself. And um, anyways, it made me think of that book, that Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It. And I thought, well, what if I were to just love myself completely in every moment? Like, I got to do something different, because chastising myself, and even though I feel like my self-talk is pretty good, um, but even feeling kind of down about things or frustrated with myself, it, you just, by the end of the day, you kind of feel beat down. And realizing, what if I changed my approach, and what if I just worked on the habit, at least for the next week, of just loving myself, um, especially, like, even more so when I don't do things as I wanted to. Like, when I don't do things as planned, if I oversleep, if I forget something, if I'm in a hurry, if I, you know, whatever it might be. Instead of being frustrated and annoyed with myself, just being like, well, Dana, um, yeah, that might be the case. You woke up late, but you're here now, and now you're doing the most important thing at this time. And you're getting things back on track, and you can still love yourself just the way you are right now. Like, we don't have to wait. You don't have to wait to love yourself once, down the road at some point, right? When we lose 20 pounds, when we get a degree, when we, um, you know, whatever, get married or get divorced or, uh, whatever these milestones are in life, like we don't have to wait to love ourselves or be good to ourselves. Like we can start doing that now. And I would even say doing it now is uh it's life changing. So it's I guess it's the whole like enjoying the journey, right? Ah, let's see. Yes, I agree. Jennifer says, that reminds me, my boyfriend told me recently that time is a more important currency than money. So he told me that I should use my time how I want and not let other people dictate my time. Yes, absolutely. That's very powerful. There's a book out there that your boyfriend might actually be referencing when he's talking about this, but at a minimum, he might enjoy it. It's called Your Money or Your Life. And it talks about the value of both, of our money and our life, because we're trading time for money if we have a traditional type job. And realizing that time is its own level of currency and we can always make more money, but we can't make more time. And so, what are we spending our time on? And are we spending time? Are we wasting time? Or are we investing our time? And kind of cultivating this very different understanding and relationship with our time. It's very eye opening. Let's see. Kevin is saying one principle, I guess you could call it, that I'm learning is when something isn't working, just do something different, even if it doesn't seem right. A good saying I keep telling myself is don't do what you think you need to do what you want to do, or do what you know you want to do. Yeah. There's this whole concept of like failing forward. And there's so much truth in that. When when we look, it's so easy, right? To be on the outside looking in and to see kind of the successes or the high points of other people and to think it came easy to them. And it's very eye-opening when you realize, oh, it didn't come easy at all. Like they had to become that person. There was Kevin, you might like this too. There's a, a podcast. I was listening to this Joe Rogan podcast earlier with, I want to say his name is David Goggins, Scroggins. He's a former retired Navy SEAL, and he wrote a book, and he's just a really intense guy. Like he was really into like ultra marathons and in pushing himself to his limits. And it was his journey is about turning his life around and kind of um, developing that self discipline, but also developing the way that he related. Uh, that he embraced being uncomfortable. So he saw all of this discomfort as an opportunity to grow, basically. A very interesting story. And kind of back to what I was saying too with people with the whole failing forward thing. It's if we could kind of pull the curtain and see the behind the scenes of any successful person, it's so much trial and error. And there's so much that you just don't see. All we tend to see is kind of their finish line. And and that can feel really defeating of because when anybody else goes through the process, right? It's you're stumbling and falling, you're stumbling and falling, you're stumbling and falling. And here they are seemingly doing it perfectly, but we didn't see all of their stumbling and falling that they went through to get where they are. So if you want to, there's a saying, something along the lines, if you want to become successful, then double up your rate of failure. There's a lot of truth. Fail quickly and fail small. so you can learn the lessons and drive on. Okay, let's see. Priscilla says, me and my partner are moving out ASAP, but in the meantime, I need strategies as now I'm too anxious to even be in the flat for long. Currently going no contact and worried it will also make things worse. And are you moving out of, oh, wait, here we go. Okay. Need help with recent, okay, narcissistic flatmate. I unwittingly stroked flames with her by defending against her abuse in a group chat. Now I feel like crap as I escalated things. Okay. And you and your partner are moving out, but in the meantime, need strategies as you're too anxious. Okay. So this is, and again, I don't have like full context. I don't know if like to what degree, if it's just unbearable tension, which is awful within itself, or if this person's like potentially dangerous. So, you know, take take your context into consideration here. When this is a good um, kind of learning opportunity, uncomfortable as it might be, of exactly what we were talking about earlier about the difference between the adult chair and the child chair. So if if she is creating what feels like unbearable tension, right? It's this icy silence, this kind of this icy presence, kind of going out of her way to not talk to you or to be very kind of curt and um, punishing, silent treatment, these kinds of things, or just snarky. When we're affected by that behavior, I mean, and don't get me wrong, like that stuff's anxiety inducing. I think for the vast majority of people out there. If But when it is anxiety inducing, it's generally because we've been knocked out of the adult chair and we're engaged in it. So it's the child, that wounded child that's taken over of, oh my gosh, well, what is she going to think of me and what is she going to say, and oh my gosh, what is she going to do, and this is so awful, and I don't want her to be mad at me, I don't want her to hate me, oh my gosh, this is so uncomfortable and I just wish it would stop, and on and on. Versus, if you think about an adult, if we let her behavior be a reflection of her and not a reflection of you, um think about an adult dealing with a child who's trying to punish them. Child, I hate you. You're not my mom. You're mean. You're cruel. And they're holding their breath. They're not talking to you. They're pouting. They want to go live with their friend's mom because she's nicer than you. And they're just really upset. If we're in the adult chair, we see that as, okay, this child does not like boundaries. They were really upset that they didn't get ice cream um, after lunch, whatever it might. They didn't get the toy that they wanted at the store. So now they're going to have all of this. They're going to throw a fit, right? We can see that their behavior it's their way of trying to punish us for not giving them what they wanted or for setting a boundary. We don't make it about us. If we're in the adult chair, we don't make it about us. If you have a parent who is not in the adult chair, they might become very anxious and unhinged and, oh, honey, don't say that, and mommy loves you and I'm so sorry, and I'll do anything to make it right, and I just, please just love me, don't get mad at me, don't do that. And then what happens? Like, then that kid 9 out of 10 times becomes a monster. They learn how to manipulate effectively. It's the same thing in our adult lives. So if we realize, okay, as sitting in the adult chair, who cares? Her behavior is a reflection of her. You don't like her to begin with. So who cares if she's mad at you? Who cares if, as long as she's not going to become violent, right? Um, she can, I hate you. I don't want to ever see you. And you ruined my life. And you're this and you're that. And I'm going to hold my breath and da, 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 da. And it's just sort of like, you know, okay. And maybe there is some accountability. Maybe, I don't know, like maybe that wasn't the time or the place to draw a boundary with her in this group chat. And maybe that does involve you owning up to that on some level, even if she is abusive and horrible, to just say, yeah, you know what? You're right. Like I should have talked to you about that in private. That wasn't the place for it. I apologize. But realizing that the adult you, who cares if she doesn't like you, doesn't, um, it- you know, asking yourself, what are you afraid of? What are you afraid of? This is such a powerful way to look at conflict and confrontation when it surfaces. And you can really tell when you ask yourself this question of who is driving the bus. Is it the child or is it the adult? Because when there is that level of like, who like fluttering in your chest, that unhinged, where you're crying and you're tense and you're like, oh my God, I can't handle people not liking me. That's the wounded child. Whereas the secure adult is coming from a place of they're being ridiculous. And, um, you know, like maybe I do need to own up to my part on it, but I'm not going to give her the power to to punish me and to let me um, feel a certain way. Like she can act however she wants to act. She can have an adult temper tantrum, but I don't need to take that on and I don't need to suffer for it. If she's got an issue with me, she can bring it up. And until she brings it up, then I'm just going to actively ignore this nonsense and go on about my life because it's an adult temper tantrum. Okay. Priscilla says, yeah, thank you. I'm most afraid of further vindictive behavior, but good. Definitely not seeking her approval or love. Did apologize, but then said um, it was a character assassination and then blocked her. Okay. And again, I don't know full context, and I get it as far as further vindictive behavior, especially if it's I think we all get it, especially if there's a group setting and there's, mutual acquaintances or business connections or whatever it might be. But perhaps reminding yourself of, okay, this is what you do have control over. This is what you don't have control over. You don't have control over any of her further vindictive behavior. Well, I mean, for real, because now, um, you've blocked her and you guys are you're actively going your separate ways. And even if you did try to make amends, we don't know. We have no control over somebody else's behavior. All you have control over is your own behavior. So if and when the situation you were to find out, oh, she is kind of stirring the pot here, right? And kind of maybe saying some things or spreading rumors or what have you, that you'll address those when they come to your attention and you'll handle it. And then you'll drive on. So yeah, just reminding yourself of you're not in this like emotional free fall with her potentially, doing tremendous amounts of damage in your life. Like you don't have the ability to control what she does, but you do have the ability to address whatever she might say and then I think most people that have a reasonable degree of emotional maturity, they tend to not get caught up. They tend to see kind of gossip and um, issues between other people as issues between other people. Um, they don't get overly enmeshed in them. Interesting. Truth seeker saying, I didn't connect where the bodily panic came from. It's the unfairly shamed child. Wow. That's really powerful. And um, my money would be on that Pete Walker would say that the next, or at least one of the next steps in healing that um, shamed child is to assign that appropriate blame. He talks about that in his book, the Tao of Fully Feeling. Of and it's just that I just love him. That book is so brilliant. Of this is the way to untangle toxic shame. So toxic shame develops generally, it's the skewed perception of events and internalizing things that aren't ours. It starts when we're young. So if a parent does something that's hurtful, instead of seeing that parent as, wow, um, mom or dad really has some unresolved baggage from their childhood, because kids, of course, don't think that way or see things that way. Instead of seeing what, wow, dad or mama really has some issues, they think, wow, what's wrong with me? Why am I so unlovable? And it's that internalization of other people's mistreatment of us. That's what creates that shame. And then it's kind of perpetuates itself because then we start seeing our behavior instead of which is so tragic because then we can kind of carry that torch for them and continue this abusive mistreatment of ourselves where if we make mistakes, instead of seeing it as, oh, I did something wrong, it's that further reinforcement of, see, I am bad or wrong. I am flawed, like deeply permanently flawed as a person. There's something profoundly wrong with me. And so I think Pete would say, um, it's that assigning blame, appropriate blame, and not in a, um, uh, and I even think that the term blame has such a negative connotation because it seems like, oh, we're somehow um, like shirking accountability or um, like delaying our healing because we're so focused on um, saying, oh, mom or dad, this is your fault. But that's not the case. That's one of the first steps in getting rid of that toxic shame is saying, gosh, you know what, man, what I went through, that being unfairly shamed as a child, being, I don't know, scolded or berated or teased or punished for wetting the bed. This is, I think, a common things that a lot of kids go through, especially if they don't develop bladder control, by age 5 or 6. Uh, and then there's this deep sense of shame and they're getting teased. So anyways, that's just one example. Um, and seeing that through the eyes of the adult and realizing, okay, um, you were a child, you hadn't developed bladder control. People develop it at different ages. So it's not this, shortcoming within you. It's not laziness necessarily. Some, can be, but for a lot of kids, it's just they don't develop bladder control until later. So being shamed and humiliated and punished by your parent, that wasn't right and that wasn't fair and that wasn't appropriate. And they messed up. That was not cool for them to do. So I'm going to give those feelings, I'm going to release them because they're not mine to carry. They should be, they should feel bad and guilty about um, the way that they mistreated you in that situation instead of you taking that on. Because that's the thing when especially if there's mm, mistreatment in general, whether it's guilt, like uncomfortable feelings, guilt, anger, uh, abuse of any kind, if the person that's causing the offending behavior isn't accountable for it, if they feel entitled, well, I yelled and screamed at you because you forgot to, um, bring home your backpack when you were a child, or you know, um, whatever, did these really shaming things to punish you because you did X, Y, and Z, not realizing uh, punishment may have been necessary to some degree, but like full out shaming and blaming and like humiliation and degradation, that's too far. But when that person's not being accountable for their bad behavior, it just kind of sits like like a low hanging thick fog in a room. And what tends to happen is then other people pick it up. It's like that secondhand cringe. You know, when somebody's doing something really embarrassing, but they're not embarrassed at all. Uh, and then we feel like that secondhand embarrassment for them. It's that same kind of sensation, but it's with guilt, which can then very quickly, especially with kids, very quickly turn into shame. So kind of unwinding it and assigning appropriate um, like responsibility and accountability, blame for behavior, releasing your part in it and realizing it's not okay to shame kids, period. End of story. Doesn't matter what they do. Like it's not productive. It's not a way to handle things. So, okay. Let me let's see. Let me scroll. Bonnie says about the failing forward. She says, Dana, yeah, the failing forward is really tough stuff. Yes. It is only when we're not accepting or acknowledging that that's part of the process. Because the reality is that's what it's going to be anyhow. So there is no getting around it. Like that's how we all learn. Like, there will be trial and error. And the pain doesn't come from the trial and error. It comes from resisting that part of the process, that there actually is trial and error. That's where the pain comes from. If we can embrace it, and this goes back to that showing compassion for ourselves, um, and it's like a little kid who's learning to walk. You've got this 18-month-old, 20-month-old toddling around. They're going to fall. Right? It's a very dicey, process of just learning how to walk. It's a lot of trial and error. They Thankfully, little kids are determined and they keep at it. And unfortunately, we kind of lose that along the way. You think about, man, if we had that level of determination with other things like playing the piano or learning French or whatever, boy, there'd be no stopping us, right? Um, but and I think in part it's the school system. There's this whole mindset of failing is bad. We're taught at a young age failing is bad. Making mistakes is bad. We need to get good grades and everything and don't make mistakes. And that's part of the problem. This is part of that social indoctrination that we need to unwind and realize if you're going to do something new, you will make mistakes. And the most successful people make the most mistakes. And I forget, if you look at as an analogy that's commonly used is with baseball hitters, the ones that score the most home runs also have the most outs because they get up to bat, the most often. So you got to get out there and then have that mindset of willingness to learn and um, and that comes with being patient and compassionate with ourselves. That can be the difficult part. Is that part of the process? Um, Frustration, determination can keep us going, but realizing if we realize, yeah, it's just part of the process. Nobody sits down unless you're Beethoven and just hammers away at the piano and does something beautiful. Like very, 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 and even he didn't just start at the finish line. Like even though he started creating amazing masterpieces at like the age of 4 or whatever, there was still that a slight learning curve there for him, even though he was a prodigy. So it's there's always a learning curve, and that's extreme, right? But like for most of us, the learning curve is more significant, and it just lasts longer when we're doing new things and embracing it. In Buddhism, there's this concept that I absolutely love. It's called the beginner's mind. And it's very much about viewing this process of like doing something different as or doing yeah, I guess doing something different, doing something for the first time is almost this kind of like sacred space and time because you can only be a beginner at something once. And I love that. I love that. So kind of just being aware of, oh my gosh, I'm just walking through this doorway for the first time. And like that's so cool, and trying to just be present uh, and excited about about what's next and about learning new things um, but I get it. I mean, I definitely get it. With especially with healing from abuse, there can be so many life skills that we're having to learn or relearn, and it can feel very overwhelming and it can feel um, defeating. But I think that's why it's so important that we realize nobody learns all of the lessons from something right off the bat. It takes a lot of trial and error. This is why one of the reasons I encourage people to um, to not jump right back into dating, but instead to give it to learn these skills, to learn about like boundaries and standards and deal breakers and assertive communication and what effective communication looks like and how it actually feels too, and the skills necessary to cultivate a healthy relationship, to learn all of that and then practice it in like a low stakes kind of way through uh, friends, coworkers, total strangers, back in the before times where we could go out and interact with people like meetup.com or whatever, like these kinds of groups. It's a great way to practice these skills and to then kind of do like the post game analysis of what happened and what could you do different next time. It's so much easier to practice and refine our approach when we don't have that deep emotional investment that tends to happen with a relationship where they're, especially if a person has that anxious level of an attachment style where they're like, okay, oh my gosh, and I really want this relationship to work out, and I really want this person to like me, and I don't want to mess it up, and I just need to, they're trying to walk this tightrope of um, they're so concerned about this person seeing them, and or they're so concerned about coming across as a normal, decent, well-adjusted person, right? Um, and and not saying or doing anything that's going to potentially turn off this other person. And that's a really difficult way to practice these skills. Okay. Okay, let's see. Let me Bonnie was saying, yeah, I will fall forward and be glad I'm falling forward. It's hard, but it is progress. Yep. Yeah. And I think just realizing, yeah, that's what progress looks like. It's falling forward. It's stumbling and falling and getting up and, dusting off your knees and getting back at it. And yeah, I think just realizing that can take a lot of the pressure off. So when mistakes are made, it doesn't further reinforce that feeling of, oh man, I'm never going to get this, or uh, you know, these feelings of shame or profound brokenness that so many of us walk around with. It's like, oh yeah, there's a mistake. Yeah, okay, that's you know, There's going to be more. My grandmother was a writer, and I didn't know this at the time. My mom was telling me this later on. My grandmother was just the sweetest person. It's amazing everything that she went through, and just still was so full of love and peace and joy and caring and concern. She just was a very beautiful human being. And anyways, so she was a writer, and this was, of course, back in the 70s, 80s, um, where you would finish a book and you would submit your manuscript to your agent or agents, and then you basically held your breath, and hopefully you got your manuscript accepted. But more often than not, you started getting rejection letter after rejection letter after rejection letter. And my grandmother's mentality, she kept all of those rejection letters. And in her mind, she's like, well, oh my goodness, I got a rejection letter. I'm that much closer to getting an acceptance letter. And so she kind of had it figured out, like early on in her writing career, that, she would get maybe 30 or 40 rejections before she would get an approval. And that was just, so it didn't phase her in the slightest, because she realized that was just part of the process. I thought that was a really good mindset to have, because I can't even imagine getting rejection letter after rejection letter in the mail, especially writing a book, because it can, uh, especially the first handful of books the person writes, they're like your babies. You put so much time and energy and effort into them. There's such a personal um, expression of, kind of who you are. Like, they're such a big part of who you are, and it takes a while to kind of get that like professional distance, I guess, where the books are still a part of you, but you can handle it if people are telling you like your baby's ugly, kind of a thing. Like, you can handle rejection and criticism, where at the beginning stages that kind of stuff can really set you back. So, okay, let me see. Let me scroll up. Okay, looks like Ava has something going on. Let me scroll here. I'm Oh, okay. Yes, Huffle Mom asks, I don't understand the difference between silent treatment and going no contact. Can you clarify for me, please? And then Ava added in, she said, if I may, silent treatment is what the narcissist does to hurt you. The no contact is a result of several warnings of boundaries and what you will do if it is not respected. Yeah, in a nutshell, silent treatment is punishing behavior. It's a type of grooming behavior. Um, it's designed, it it's ineffective, kind of, you could say, passive aggressive or even aggressive communication. Basically, if you do this, then you're going to suffer. And and so I'm going to create this very tense, icy atmosphere with the intention of making you suffer, because you know, I'm creating a very uncomfortable atmosphere, and I know that. That's kind of the mindset of the silent. That's what the silent treatment causes. So silent treatment's a punishing behavior, and it's designed to teach a person how to act, like what to say or what not to say. Oh, if you did that again, if you do this again, these are the consequences. No contact is not punishing, it's self-protective. So no contact, like Ava was saying, it's coming from a place of self-protection. It's not about punishing the other person at all. It's saying, um, this I can't have this in my life. Like, this is damaging to me in some way, shape, or form, and I need to get distance, significant distance from this person. And sometimes, like Ava was saying, we might, and it just depends on the situation, right? Like, we might, um, assert our boundary. Oh, that's not okay with me. I don't like being talked to like that, or whatever, a couple times with a person, depending. Or they might do something that's just so egregious that we're instantly no contact. They might fly into a rage or start becoming verbally abusive, or just really, really crossing lines with us. We're like, you know what? Like, this is so far over uh things I want to issues that I even want to deal with in trying to have a relationship with somebody, that this is going to be this is just a preview. This is going to be more to follow, because this any um person with kind of reason, like effective like in the ballpark of effective communication, would know like that's not how to handle things. So it's okay if you and I guess I'm thinking more in the context of dating. If you go on a few dates with a person and then all of a sudden you see like this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of stuff, and um, you know, like, we don't need to no contact is its own boundary. So if their behavior is so ridiculous that you're like, you know what, no, I'm done. Done. Like, we don't need to talk about it. I don't There's nothing to work on. It's so over the top. Now, any work on it, it's not it's just not a good use of time for anyone involved, because then it's turning that other person into a project, and that will only frustrate you, and it's going to cause resentment for them. So, okay, let's see. Interestingly enough, the silent treatment is a form of verbal abuse. Strange as that might sound. Trying to think, there's another, I don't know really what you would call it. I guess withdrawing. There's another form of kind of keeping quiet that a lot of survivors or people that are experiencing abuse tend to do. So silent treatment tends to be this punishing behavior. I can't believe you did this. Now you're going to suffer. That's the message with silent treatment. If a person's on the receiving end of abuse and they're in a relationship where, like, you get the feeling like this person just seems to want to fight with me. Everything I say, they take issue with. They want to fight. They want to debate. This isn't. We're not having a dialogue here. They're wanting to duel. Like, they're wanting to fight, and I don't want to engage in this. So I am going to shut down communication, and because it's not going anywhere, because we're not communicating. They're just uh they're wanting to fight, and I don't want to do that. So letting them know, I feel like this conversation's not getting anywhere. Um, it I feel like everything that I bring up, you take issue with and you want to fight about, and there is no uh, focus on being solutions oriented. And so I think for that reason, we need to pick up this conversation at another on a tomorrow or at another time, because obviously no resolution can be had, and I don't want to fight because it's just not productive. Like, we can disagree, but I don't want to fight about it. There's that type of kind of shutting down communication, but do you see how that's different than silent treatment, and how that's different from no contact? Because you're still asserting yourself and saying, here's what's going on. This is why I'm not engaging in this any further. We can pick up this conversation on another date, but kind of only under these terms. I'm not looking to uh, you know, just get in this verbal tug of war. If we can work towards a solution, then great. If we can't, then I just need to drive on, you know? Or I guess there's a fourth type. If a person is so upset that they're like, you know what? I am so upset right now. Anything, I'm concerned that anything I say is going to be mean. And I don't I don't want like certain things you can't apologize for. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, you can apologize for them, but they can't, apologies don't undo them. And so realizing I am so mad right now, this is not the time for me to be having a discussion about this because uh, I'm not thinking clearly. I'm just so angry. Again, different from silent treatment because you're letting the person know I'm so angry right now and I need some time and some space to just get recentered. And let's have this conversation. Can we pick up this conversation, tomorrow or in that sometime within a reasonable time frame in the next couple days? Like I need some time to just kind of regroup so I don't say things that I'm going to later regret. Like I'm just at a breaking point. So, yeah. Okay, let me scroll up. Mystique. Bonnie was saying, cha cha cha. Oh, you're welcome, Huffle Mom. She says, thank you for your explanation. Also, thank you to everyone who explained these things to me. You guys are awesome. I agree. You guys are really awesome. I really enjoy seeing all of the support in the chat and the the yeah, just the support and the comments that are made. It's really it's just cool. It's cool to see. Okay, Bonnie asks, when is enough enough? Everybody has their own line with that. Um, I guess, and it did. I mean, it's going to depend on context and lots of other things. For me personally, it's if when it becomes very clear that like effective communication or resolving an issue uh, in a healthy, effective way, functional way, when I realize that's not possible, then it becomes enough is enough, and that's my line. So, but at that point, it doesn't necessarily mean that I will cut off complete contact with the person. I might realize, oh, like this is, kind of this is how they handle certain things, whatever it might be. Uh, I've kind of reached like their limits of, you know, their ability to handle stress or their ability to cope with their anger or whatever it might be, realizing, okay, my expectations, then realizing, okay, I've tried to bring this up multiple times and um kind of this is what I need for this situation to work, and I need for us to be able to talk openly about it, and it's okay. It's okay to feel how you feel, and I can, hold space for you and still be respectful, and um we can disagree but still have that connection to each other. Some people aren't comfortable with that. I would say probably a lot of people are not comfortable with that because it's not a skill that's taught or really role modeled for most people. So it feels really awkward to be honest. It really is what it is, to just be honest and say, yeah, you know what? It really frustrates me that um I'm the one that makes the bed every single day, or that uh what, I don't know, whatever it is. And it really would mean a lot to me if we could work more as a team, and maybe we can, if you don't want to make the bed, then that's fine. Like, let's divvy things up because I'm feeling it's kind of lopsided. I feel like I'm doing all of the or like the vast majority of the, I don't know, housekeeping or whatever. How do you feel about that? And then they might have their own so it's that ability to be open and honest and sincere, and then solutions oriented, and then to negotiate. If that's not there, then it's going to be very difficult to have any type of effective relationship with that person moving forward. Think about it in terms of, um, in a different context. Think about it in terms of a business partner. Okay. If you had a business partner who never told you, who was more focused on kind of people pleasing and keeping you happy all the time, and not letting you know when there were concerns, or not letting you know that they were uh, things were going on because they didn't want to upset you or whatever. Maybe it's easier to kind of see the imbalance in that type of a dynamic when there's not that emotional, necessarily that emotional connection there. Do you see how that imbalance is going to cause a wobble, to the point if it's not corrected, it's it will topple over. So it's so vital to have that effective communication and to be open and honest with ourselves, so we can be open and honest with other people in, a tactful, solutions oriented way. Boundaries are going to get crossed. Like, that's just part of two people, you know, being authentic, because everybody's boundaries are different. Um, you know, uh, in little ways and in big ways too. It depends on, uh, I think it's more about how do you handle it when your boundaries are crossed? And, does the other person respect it, or do they sit there and do they want to fight you about it? They want to argue. There's a lot of pushback. They get defensive, all of that. Even if they're, uh, well intended, it's very difficult to have a relationship with a person who can't put themselves in your shoes and understand, yeah, okay, I get how that's not a boundary for you. Um, Whatever it might be. You have no problem telling certain types of jokes or using certain words or whatever. I get it. I get how that's not a big deal for you. It's a big deal for me. I don't like that kind of humor, or I find certain words offensive, and um, I don't want to have this conversation, or like, please don't use those terms around me, or don't tell me jokes like that. And if they keep on, and they're like, "Oh, no, no, you're just too sensitive," "Oh, it's this," and they're minimizing, they're invalidating, they're, um, very diminishing, then like, there's no respect for your boundaries, and then there's kinda no respect for you, because 'cause they're focused on being right, not on working as a team. It granted, it can be very difficult to see another point of view. We all kinda struggle with this, from time to time. 'Cause it's just, obviously it's not our point of view, right? So it's not a point of view that we're carrying around in our brain. So it catches us off guard, and I think the natural human inclination is to get defensive when we're being questioned about something, when we don't think what we did was wrong. Especially if our intentions were good. We tell a joke that we tease somebody, um, thinking it was funny, or our intentions were good, but it didn't land that way. Uh I think I told you guys, this was, again, years ago, God, 30 something years ago. This was back when I was like Bennigan's and those places saying happy birthday. And there was a little girl I babysat for, and I thought it would be fun. So we took her out for her birthday to, like a Bennigan's type, or Chili's, or one of the places. They sang happy birthday to her. She was horrified, and totally, this was obviously not my intention. I thought she would just love it, and would just be so tickled with them coming through the restaurant with the cake and, singing. They had her name and everything. No, this kid crying. She was so embarrassed, and I just felt horrible. Um, So even though my intentions were good, I was trying to make her birthday special and memorable, in a positive way, it completely backfired, and that's not how she took it. And, you know, she felt like she was very embarrassed, and it was not good. And so there was no point in me trying to argue with her, be like, "No, no, see, this was enjoyable and this was for you and you're just too sensitive." Like, that doesn't do anything. It Validating her, "Oh my goodness, honey, I am so sorry. That was completely not my intention to embarrass you at all. I thought that would be fun. And, that really missed the mark. I'm so sorry. That won't happen again." So, yeah, kind of making those shifts in communication. So I guess to answer your question, very long-winded roundabout kind of way, it's enough is enough when um you realize that there's not that level of respect, and there's not that um ability to be solutions oriented and to be accountable. Okay. Sorry about that. I really went on a tangent there. Salon asks, Dana, do you currently read and answer messages on your email from us? I am in the process of getting a process about handling email. My email has been a mess for a very long time, and I've hired several people to try to help with email management, and it's just not worked. And so my ultimate goal is to be able to get back to doing that. Um, you can email me. It might take me, especially right now, because I'm finishing up a lot of like major loose ends. Um, you can email me. It might take me a minute, like probably a week or so, realistically, to get back to you. You can email me at Dear Dana at thriveafterabuse.com. You will get the autoresponder that always just goes out in case people are in crisis and they're needing to get into the support group. Um, but I am working on a system to get back to as many people as I possibly can. It helps if, um, well, yeah, just send me email. I'm working on it. Okay, let's see. Yep, totally. Will Fight for Food says, I've learned that sometimes people just need to be allowed to feel. They don't need me to fix them or fix things for them. They're perfectly capable. They just want or need support. Yeah. Yep. I agree with you completely. And that can be such a difficult thing to do. It's hard. It's hard to see someone in pain, and to not, I think kind of the knee jerk reaction is we want to make people feel better. Right? The unintended consequence of that, I think more often than not, is we're fixing problems that they don't want fixed, and we're kind of silencing them because maybe they're just wanting to be heard. Um, and it can be, and it can help too for people. And this goes back to like effective communication, right? Sometimes it helps letting people know what you're needing in that time. So if, because sometimes we might want advice and other times we don't. We just want to be heard, or we just want to vent. And prefacing whatever you're going to say to somebody, because again, this can be well intended, right? So you're talking about your ex, and they're trying to, and they see how hurt you are, and then they jump in because they're trying to make you feel better, and they're saying, oh well, you should just be so glad that relationship's over. That person was absolute garbage, totally not for you. You should be glad. Just you got to move on with your life. They're spouting all this stuff off, and I'm sure I'm guilty of it too. Um, and that's not what that person needs at that time. And then it can kind of start this landslide of guilt and shame and what's wrong with me? Why do I miss this person that was so awful to me? And uh when maybe all they're needing is um just empathy and validation of, wow, I'm sorry, that is so tragic, that sounds so hurtful. um I'm just uh, that must have been very difficult to go through, you know. So okay, let's see, let me scroll up. Jennifer asked, Dana, how do you know if you're a sociopath? I know with a psychopath, you have more of that hunter's mentality and you're born with it. But what about sociopathy? Okay, hold on a second here. This is a great question. And it depends how you're looking at it. So, in terms of like diagnosis, sociopathy and psychopathy is combined under antisocial personality disorder, and there isn't a distinction that's made. It's basically, does this person have, are they showing um, kind of a blatant disregard for others? Is there a lack of empathy? Is there a lack of remorse? Is there destruction to property? Are they, hurtful to animals or other people? Is there a lack of accountability? Is there, um, yeah, just kind of this general lack of regard for rules and norms and the rights of others, in a nutshell, would constitute antisocial personality disorder. I think there's this idea out there that, uh, well, I guess let me back up. Mental health diagnoses are not as, I guess they're more of an art form than physical health diagnoses. So physical health, it's more objective, right? Like these are the markers, like these are the lab panels that are going to say that you're going to have kind of these lab values with this certain type of disease, and there's signs and symptoms, but there's also uh, physical, kind of more concrete, objective things that you can point at and see and say, yes, here's a sign of, appendicitis, or here's, do you see what I'm saying? With mental health, it's not as, um, and there's more room for interpretation. And so I think a lot of people really kind of get stressed out about the diagnosis of I mean, understandably so, right? The diagnosis of antisocial personality disorder. Um, because it's basically in effect saying that this person is a sociopath or a psychopath. And it's, I don't want to say like it's not that deep. Like there's not like this huge amount of like clinical, um, y- you know, testing, I guess that's what I'm saying, that goes on with making a diagnosis. Like you're looking at, okay, does this person's behavior match, so many criteria uh, as specified by the DSM? Kind of what are you, and every clinician's going to see things differently. So, okay, so then there's that aspect of it, of it's not so cut and dry, and it's going to be very subjective based off of each kind of clinician's experience and their own hidden biases and understandings of problematic behavior, um, or even good behavior, right? They might say like, oh, this person, they're crying and they're saying all the right things, so then therefore they're not um, a narcissist or they don't have antisocial personality disorder because they seem sincere. It's like, well, yeah, but sometimes a lot of manipulative people can come across as very sincere and they're very destructive. Um, so okay, so I guess what I'm saying is the distinction is not normally made anymore. Um, it I'm sure that it is on some level with researchers that are trying to parse out the differences between nature and nurture, and that's kind of been the ongoing, um, like, debate or dilemma with sociopathy and psychopathy. Sociopathy tends to be more of, like, a nature thing, like, "Oh, this person kind of, you know, um" oh, I'm sorry, nurture, more of a nurture thing. It's more of environmental. uh, Bad neighborhood, bad childhood, kind of, abuse, neglect, these kinds of things versus psychopathy, which um, is more, some studies have shown it's more of a nature thing. Like, okay, there's brain abnormal, there was, brain differences. I, I'd have to go really, I've never really done a deep dive into the research on that. I don't know if I necessarily, um, I guess here's my thing with psychopathy, especially. I don't personally, I would be highly suspect of tests that are saying that a person is born with with psychopathy. They might be born with different types of um, diminished functioning or overactive functioning in their brain, like overactive, I don't know, amygdala, diminished, um, uh, you know, uh, areas of the brain that control, um, empathy or um, remorse or um, kind of um, help to control impulsive behavior. Like they might, there might be some nature to that. Um, I think an awful lot of it tends to come from environment. So my guess, and again, I'd have to go look at this research. There's a lot to be said. There's a whole process with infants. Okay, it's called neural pruning, and an infant's brain has all kind like crazy amounts. I forget. It's like wildly high number of um, neural connections, and if this is why it's so important to engage with babies because their brains, if certain areas aren't stimulated, they literally die off. So it's it can cause significant brain damage in a child to have that lack of that lack of stimulation in general, emotional, physical, or otherwise. So, it's singing to babies, making eye contact, having that connection, spending time with them, um, you know, engaging all different type parts of their brain to stimulate as much activity as possible. It makes me wonder if the tests that have been done on children where they're saying, "Oh, this child's born with psychopathy." Like, I just don't, I mean, have there been brain scans done on infants? I don't think so. Like, again, I'd have to go look at the research, but, if anything, it tends to be more the stuff that I've seen, the research that I've seen tends to be on small, young children, probably under the age of 10, that have, what would be considered when they're older to be more of antisocial traits, violence, hurting animals, killing animals, lack of empathy, lack of remorse, kind of this sadistic bend. Um, they enjoy inflicting pain on other people, this kind of stuff. That behavior, by and large, tends to stem from what's known as reactive attachment disorder. So it's children that don't form, that effective bonds are not formed between a child and their primary caregiver. And so everything we were talking about earlier with attachment styles, when that's not developed, there was a study done with infants in, um, Russian, like a Russian orphanage, and all the caregivers, the ratio of babies to caregivers was it was really high. It was like 20 or 30 to 1 kind of a thing. So they were barely able to keep up with feeding and changing. They weren't engaging in any other way. The result was a lot of these children that were being adopted out, even though they had their basic needs met, they didn't have their emotional and psychological needs met. And they were finding all kinds of behavioral disorders from these kids. And I think a lot during that time, there was a lot of that kind of led to a lot of studies and talk about, oh, this child's psychopathic, because that's what that behavior looks like. But I wouldn't say that it's just um, they were born that way. I think it was a series of potentially neglect and um, profound neglect, abuse as a child, coupled with their brains don't develop in kind of the same way. I don't there's Just because a person has diminished empathy or diminished remorse or um, certain areas of the brain doesn't necessarily make them a psychopath. Like there was some TED talk or something that I saw, and I get so to me it's I just get so frustrated because to me that's an ocean of difference. Anyways, it was this one researcher, this like neuroscientist who was studying brain scans, and he realized that he kind of like by accident, I don't even believe this, like the whole thing just is such nonsense to me. Um, it- you know, this one scan they couldn't account for. Anyways, long story short, it turns out it's his scan and he has the brain of a psychopath. And so he's like, oh my gosh, like realizing, oh my, I am the psychopath. And it's so ridiculous because just having diminished brain act, it's sort of like saying if all cats are mammals, then all mammals are cats. Like, no, it doesn't work that way. Just because all psychopaths have diminished brain activity doesn't mean that everybody with the diminished brain activity has the behavior of a psychopath. Um, so there's that. Um, Sociopaths, this has just been my personal experience. Sociopaths tend to be they're like the emotional con artists of the world. Charming, charismatic, uh, really know how to kind of milk a crowd, you know? And they're very, what's the word I'm looking for? Um, Starts with an E, like exploitative. They exploit other people. It's for their personal gain. And whereas uh, the few patients that I've worked with that I would say would err more on like the psychopathic part of the spectrum, they didn't care. They didn't care what you thought of them. They weren't it was their personality was more uh it was just more distant, it was cold, it was calloused, it was, I mean, they could be pleasant and polite, but at the end of the day, like they just didn't give a crap what people thought. And there was this um really deep lack of regard for others. It was just all about them. And whereas sociopaths, they did they were more focused on image of people's perceptions of them, and maybe even just their perceptions of themselves, like trying to convince themselves that they were a decent person. Uh, Whereas narcissists, it's more about ego. Um, they can't handle any type of like affront to their ego, being challenged, being questioned, whatever, they become very reactive and attacking and accusatory, and it's very, very immature behavior with narcissists. It's adult temper tantrums, basically. Sociopaths don't necessarily have that. They can come across as like really insightful and um, they're con artists. Like they're not as reactive, I guess is what I'm saying, by and large, as narcissists. And psychopaths tend to have more of that complete emotional detachment. Like just, you know, they don't care. So if we're talking about attachment styles, the psychopath would be more on that dismissive avoidant side of truly don't care. You live, you die, you stay with me, you leave, whatever. Like they really don't care. So um it's extreme. But there's no emotional investment, or very, very little, or if there is an emotional investment, it's very superficial and self-serving and fleeting. That movie, or that was it the Netflix show Mindhunters, uh, I thought really summed up that kind of like dismissive, avoidant, kind of psychopathic behavior well. There was one prisoner that they were interviewing, and the guy had rescued a baby bird and he was feeding it. And um, one of the detectives asks him about the connection to the baby bird, and kind of like, oh, this is interesting, right? Like here's this cold-hearted killer, but there's got to be some sort of humanity within him somewhere, because here he is taking care of this wounded bird and he's nurturing. He's showing empathy, he's showing care, he's showing concern for this other living creature. And the guy kind of senses this, and immediately, because especially for that extreme, like pathological, dismissive, avoidant, connection equals vulnerability, and vulnerability equals weakness, and weakness is it's not only unsafe, it's like disgusting to them. And so in the show, he takes the bird and he throws it into a fan, and he kills the bird. And he just makes the comment like, oh, I guess it's not that bird's lucky day or whatever. And the detective was like, wow, here's this prisoner who's put in all of his time and energy and effort into nursing this bird, and then he just kills him. And that's exactly that was such a great scene, because that sums it up so perfectly. Like they might care for whatever reasons they have at the time, but then on the flip of a dime, they don't care. There is no deep level of attachment there. Does that So I guess to answer to answer your question of how does a person know if they're a sociopath? Um, I am not a fan of um, telling somebody who has antisocial behavior that they have antisocial personality disorder. There's no benefit to that, because then they're going to kind of it creates the sense of learned helplessness of, oh, see, I can't change. I'm a sociopath, or I'm a psychopath. Um, so there's no benefit. If anything, it tends to make them worse, not better. Uh, letting them know that it just creates these feelings of like superiority and power, and look at me, I'm so blah, ha, ha, like I lack empathy, I lack remorse, I'm dangerous, I'm crazy, like don't mess with me, kind of a thing. And uh, so there's no benefit, you know, the treatment, because that kind of behavior tends to be that personality tends to be so treatment resistant. It doesn't impact treatment. Like I said, it only makes it worse if they're aware that you think that they have antisocial personality disorder. So how would a person know they're a sociopath? See, the other challenge to this is all of the behavior that's in the DSM is within the range of human behavior. Like none of it's alien or supernatural. Like it's all human behavior. It's the degree and frequency that it occurs, that's what makes it problematic. So even for clinicians or even for people that are reading the DSM or learning about sociopaths or psychopaths, that's what can be so terrifying. It's kind of the same thing with WebMD, like you have a lot of these symptoms like, I don't know, what does this mean? Does this mean I'm a sociopath? Does this mean that um, you've got some rare disease? Um, I think for most people with mental health kind of stuff, this is why it's not an exact science. It tends to be so many um, person needs to their behavior needs to fit so many criteria. Each disorder has specific criteria, and it's like, okay, you need to have kind of, I don't know, 5 out of the 9 or 9 out of the 12 or whatever it might be to meet criteria for this. My guess would be a person that is more on like the sociopathic side of the spectrum, they're generally probably just not going to care. That's the thing, because there's that avoidant bend to their personality. So developing a real, like, authentic relationship with another person has no appeal. Um, I mean, I'm sure there's exceptions to that, but I would probably, by and large, that would be my guess. And then they might notice some diminished empathy or remorse. But again, it's difficult because we don't know like, I don't know how much empathy or remorse you have, right? Because I'm not you. Like, these things are very hard to quantify. So, and because we are each our own baseline for normal, that makes it even more challenging. Because I don't know, like, what is my level of empathy compared to your level of empathy, right? Um, I don't know. I guess it's not an easy answer, is what I'm saying. Uh, right. And Salon is saying, yeah, there's so much overlap and symptoms of mental disorders. Yeah. And that's one of the the challenges with the DSM in general. And one of the things that the panel, when they meet and they discuss different disorders, that they've been trying to um, kind of eliminate as much redundancy and overlap as possible. So you know, it's an evolution. It's the failing forward. If you look at DSM-1 versus DSM-5, very, very different. DSM-1 is like a pamphlet, and DSM-5 is like an encyclopedia, like several encyclopedias. It's big. It's a thick book. Yeah, UNA says, I think NPD is the same sort of thing. Once diagnosed, it's used as a badge to excuse bad behavior. Same thing with BPD. That's a hard ethical question. Yeah. One of the ways that I have phrased, one of the ways that I find helpful phrasing this, and I know that I don't know if they've changed the wording yet in the DSM. I know that I think that change might be coming in the next version. I know that there was talk about it, at least, um, like a couple years ago, with um, in terms of like personality disorders, talking about it in terms of more like problematic personality traits. And I, in many ways, I like that better in terms of diagnosis, because that's really, it's more accurate. It's what it is. Uh, the term personality disorder tends to create this feeling of like identity foreclosure of, oh, well, there's no hope for me. Like, how, effed am I? Like a personality disorder. Geez, like that sounds so horrible. Um, and it's what a personality disorder is it's that behavior that's, you know, kind of the degree and frequency of this behavior. It's so problematic that it's negatively impacting this person's life, kind of whether or not they're aware of it. So, or the lives of those around them. Um, and that's why it's a disorder, because it's impacting their personality is off balance, uh, in in kind of in this category with these certain traits. This cluster of traits is off balance in such a way that it's causing major disruption to their life, whether or not they, or the lives of those around them, whether or not they realize it or not. And with NPD, with a lot of different diagnoses, a person might not realize it. Um, so yeah, I think talking to people, especially with BPD, if they're like, their life is not working and they're very emotionally reactive. And I like to phrase it in terms of traits, like stuff's not taught. Like we're still kind of in the very, the, dark ages really with understanding and treating mental health. And it's very easy for anybody to get kind of off balance. And these are some traits, uh, you know, I like to just think of it as more of an imbalance. Let's focus on correcting the imbalance and making your life work. So you're still, because really, I mean, a lot of these different diagnoses, there is hope and there is treatment. And I think kind of couching that conversation in such a way that allows a person the possibility of change. Because it can sound just as heavy hearing, oh yeah, you've got this personality disorder, as, oh, you have cancer or you have HIV. Like it can feel like a death sentence. Um, so yeah, I think kind of couching it in a way of, yeah, okay, well, here's some things we can do. And, you know, just here's some treatments and move forward and try to make, like, what does it look like for you to have your life work, and what, in different areas, and how will we know as we go through if your life is working for you? And yeah. Darlene says, I'm wondering if a recent reaction of mine is normal. My daughter told me that my ex had a quote unquote friend, likely more, who had a history of catfishing. I felt oddly happy that he might get a dose of his own medicine, and then I felt ashamed for thinking that way. I think the sense of justice is almost an ingrained trait in all of us. And so there, yeah, I mean, it's uncomfortable because we're taught um, that kind of these emotions of, um, I don't know, like revenge, right? Or, oh yeah, I guess revenge, or these kinds of things are bad. And the reality is we all feel how we feel. It's completely understandable and appropriate to to have that initial knee-jerk reaction of, yeah, you want the score to be settled. Like you want them to feel, you want them to suffer, you want them to hurt like they hurt you. I think that's perfectly within the range of understandable human emotion. A lot of people won't admit to it, and so we try to suppress that, or like you said, or if we feel ashamed of, oh, I shouldn't be thinking such things, or I, We get upset with ourselves. It's, you know, Carl Jung, a lot of his work was on the shadow self, and it was all about kind of realizing, yeah, there's this dark side. We all have kind of this dark side. Not kind of, we have this dark side to us where there are those feelings of revenge. There are those just disturbing thoughts that kind of bubble up from time to time. You know, it's in kind of learning to, I guess, like, accept and acknowledge that, and that you're not a monster for having, for having these thoughts, and you know, it's okay. It's more of uh, what is the behavior that tends to follow with that. I mean, if it's like actively creating a scenario in which to ruin another person's life, like you know that's maybe taking it a little bit far, but um, you just kind of like chuckle to yourself and you're like, well, it's I don't know. I don't think that there's needs to be feelings of shame or feeling ashamed or guilty or bad for thinking those things. Like you think, like I said, we all have thoughts that bubble up, and uh yeah, your thoughts don't really define you. It's more your actions that define a person. Okay, let me see here. Let me scroll up. Yes, I like that. I don't even know what this is in context to, but you're spot on with this. Helpful Mom was saying, I've heard people say that the opposite of love isn't hate, that they are too emotionally similar. The opposite of love is indifference. I couldn't agree more. Yep. There has to be hate is a very emotionally charged uh, feeling, just like love. So they're both powered by an intense amount of emotional energy, whereas indifference is apathy. There's a complete lack of love with indifference. Jennifer says, me and my boyfriend were just talking today about how therapists stick to the DSM-5 when, I mean, it's the fifth one. So it's bound to evolve further. Why not be open to things like CPTSD that could eventually end up in the DSM at some point? Um, yeah, well, I mean, the DSM, like pretty much anything else, it's always in a constant state of evolution. When we know different, we do different. So when and there's so many different layers to things. There's this cultural layer, there's these hidden biases, there's religious layers to things. There's all kinds of layers that we might not even be aware of, that tend to pose a challenge, especially when it comes to understanding behavior, and even physical illness. I mean, for a long time, emotionally volatile women were given a hysterectomy. So like it had nothing to do with their uterus. So it is testing techniques evolve and science evolves and research evolves, then treatment evolves too. CPTSD was, if I remember correctly, it was originally brought up, I want to say like in 1988. And I think the challenge was at that time that um, I don't know if there was just too many similarities to PTSD or if there just wasn't enough research. CPTSD is a, a diagnosis in um, certain areas that use the ICD-10, which is a different type of diagnosis code, generally in other countries. Um, so, and that's the thing with the DSM, it's always evolving. So there's um, disorders that are added, and then there's disorders that are taken away. And it always is controversial. Uh, like I want to say, I'll have to see if I can even find it. I have a pamphlet of all the changes that were made to the DSM, like inclusions and exclusions. And, uh, you know, it's interesting to kind of keep up with all of that. I want to say that they changed a few things with autism spectrum, for example. I think that they might have removed Asperger's from uh, the DSM, or they renamed it. There tends to be kind of this reshuffling of terms or reclassifications of certain things. It doesn't mean that something doesn't exist. Just like the term sociopathy sociopathy and psychopathy now fall under the umbrella of antisocial personality disorder. It doesn't mean that there um, aren't differences between the two. And it doesn't mean um, it doesn't mean that there's no such thing as a sociopath or a psychopath. All it means is, for in terms of diagnosis, it's the umbrella. It's not necessary to parse out to such a degree of what you're dealing with. It's just an overview of, hey, here's a pattern of problematic behavior in these areas. The diagnosis, you have like assessment, diagnosis, treatment plans. You have, gathering of information that you're making your diagnosis from. Then the diagnosis guides the treatment plan. And the coding for DSM also really heavily ties into billing, insurance billing. So that's another huge, and that sounds more like nefarious and conspiratorial than it really is. It's just physical health is the same way. So everything has a diagnosis code associated with it for insurance billing purposes. But for a patient, if you go in and you get your medical record, or your record from your mental health professional, especially if your insurance is covering it, you might see all kinds of diagnosis codes, and then that can feel be very overwhelming. Like, oh my God, there's so much wrong with me. Like I have 5 different mental health disorders, and it might be there's it could be that a person has behavior that's falling into those categories that would meet the criteria for these different diagnoses. But it also could be that because diagnoses are also changed. So then if medication is being changed or tried, the insurance might only cover certain medication if a certain diagnosis code is assigned to the patient. I mean, there's so much more to it, and is what I'm trying to say. So I really am sorry. I feel like I've had a lot of coffee today. I feel like I've been very rambling big time. Oh, goodness. Thank you guys for sticking with me. I hope you've gotten something out of the talk tonight. Let's see. And my guess would be, Jennifer, to answer your question too, that the more research that's done on trauma, especially, I think that's kind of the next big wave of understanding with mental health is trauma, and assessing and diagnosing and treating that. we'll start to see more trauma specific um, diagnoses become part of the mainstream, which is exciting because there's a big difference between emotional dysregulation, kind of like what we've been talking about this whole night. Emotional dysregulation isn't all the same. A person might have like a lack of empathy due to like a blunted affect from unprocessed trauma, and they want to connect to other people, and there is that care and concern, but they just feel kind of numb or hollow inside. Or whereas another person might have that same blunted affect and no connection, and uh, be a danger to society. Or it might be more cognitive, and it's more mm, uh, neurological, where kind of more like on the autism spectrum, where there's that level of kind of disconnect, or more schizoid. I mean, there's so many like there's so many different categories behavior can fall into. Okay. Kenneth says, "What kind of coffee do you drink?" All of it. I drink all of it. I am not a coffee snob by any stretch. Uh I just love coffee. So, yeah, I'm completely open. I guess if I had my choice, I really do like a Costa Rican coffee. And there's a place here in Michigan that offers like Michigan cherry coffee that's so good. Oh, I love it. Okay, we'll go with this last question and then we'll wrap up here. And okay, we're gonna be over. Milk Dud asks, can someone have narcissistic traits but be codependent? That is a big question, and it's a great question. And short answer is yes. Long answer, which I promise, like I won't drag this out, is it's similar behaviors, but there's different um, causative reasons for it. So narcissism, it tends to be uh, more about power and control. It's more of the kind of domination driven mindset. There's um, whereas codependent behavior is, in many ways, it's kind of the opposite. It's more of this, instead of this domination driven codependent team seems blah, codependent behavior is more this excessive emotional reliance on other people. So it's kind of, which comes across as like needy or clingy. Um, um, Codependent people, because of that. So you can have, so let's say, for example, um, you might have controlling behavior in a codependent person and in a narcissistic person. A narcissistic person's controlling others more from a place of entitlement and a need to kind of keep security in their life of you need to be what I think that you need to be. Basically, in order for me to have peace in my life, I need you to live inside this box that I've created for you. Whereas codependent, the level of control is more of, I need you to change in order for this relationship to work. So I guess you could say codependent's more about the relationship. It tends to be more of a fear. It's that anxious style of attachment again. It's the don't leave me. I'll do anything to make this work. Um, but it's staying with a lot of the wrong people for way too long because it's that inability to it's too enmeshed, and so it's this inability to walk away I wouldn't say inability, they can, uh, extreme struggle to walk away from a relationship because it's that fear of abandonment and it's that need to be with another person in order to feel complete. And so the result of that is them trying, instead of having healthy boundaries and standards and deal breakers and being able to say enough is enough, I need to, you know, this isn't working for me. It's, oh, I'm just going to keep this relationship together forever. But this person has all kinds of problematic behavior. They're abusive, or they have a drug or alcohol problem, or they've got some like significant issues that are deeply damaging the relationship. But because leaving the relationship just is not even on their radar, um, then the focus kind of by default is going to be like, well, if I'm not going to leave the relationship, then obviously the relationship's going to have to change, which is going to require this person becoming a different person, basically. And this is what's so difficult for so many people that struggle with codependency to understand, because I think we can all get it, right? If you're in a relationship with somebody and you're like, well, God, this person, they're threatening, they're intimidating, they're using drugs, they're doing all these things. We all agree all of that's a problem. And so trying to explain to a person that's struggling with codependency, uh, yeah, like it's not the person with that the person who's abusing and using, um, uh, yes, their behavior is a problem, but then you staying with them is also a problem, or not having boundaries and kind of this continual forgiveness and allowance of hurtful behavior is a problem. Of course, that does not go over well at all, because it's sort of like, well, no, 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 everything would be perfect. This relationship would be fine if they would only stop, abusing or using or whatever it is that they're doing. But it's like, but if they're not motivated to stop, um, but that the codependent person's willing to completely have themselves destroyed by this relationship or by this other person, with the 1% chance, holding on to that hope that things can be turned around. So, and again, it's more complicated than that. There's a lot of really toxic social programming that kind of goes into create just messed up messages about love and relationships and family and commitment and all kinds of stuff that feed into that. So it's not just attachment style, or it's not just, um, you know, kind of like one or two things. It's a, a combination of things. I hope that answers your question. Uh, right? Cecilia says, "What do you mean I can leave?" Yeah. Yeah, I remember I was dating this completely psycho guy when I was in high school, and I vividly remember, uh, because this relationship was, I mean, the guy was psycho, and this relationship was insane, and I kept, like, venting, bitching to a friend of mine about it, and she just didn't get it, and she's like, "Well, why don't you just leave?" I'm like, and I just thought that was so horrible. Like, "What do you mean? Like, why do I, like, I'm not gonna just leave." Like, that's absurd, right? And then this is why other people then start distancing themselves, because 'cause they're like, I can't." Like, you're staying with this dangerous, destructive person, you won't leave because you're focused on trying to get him to change, because you need to keep this relationship together to feel complete. This person's not gonna change. Do you see the pattern of faulty thinking there, um, and how scary and dangerous and destructive it can be for everybody involved? Ay, ay, ay. So, okay. So with that said, let's wind down. Let and get um grounded, kind of back into ourselves, and I don't know, kind of just connect with uh everything that's good and right about you and your healing process so far, and all of the the just everything that's good and right about you, all of the care and compassion that you guys give each other in the chat, that the level of awareness that you have, the um setting that goal of having this positive direction in your life, um and moving forward, and realizing uh that this isn't an end, that it truly is a new beginning. And I know that some people in the chat have been saying, oh my gosh, Dana, it's like you're describing my life. And, Truth Seeker, I think at one point was saying this really can be triggering when it hits so close to home. And I guess to bring love and compassion to that emotion, those emotional wounds, and to those feelings that surface when these conversations can hit a little too close to home, and you're like, ooh, yikes. This is tough stuff. And uh, it's a lot. It's a lot. It's like taking a drink out of a fire hose, especially if you're new to all of this stuff. It can feel very overwhelming. So I guess just taking some time to congratulate yourself for being dedicated to your personal growth, and to healing yourself and making your life work. And yeah, so I guess just taking a moment, allowing your gaze to soften or your eyes to close, whatever's the most comfortable for you. And allowing yourself to settle into this moment. Taking several deep breaths in through your nose and then out through your mouth. Bringing your awareness to your different senses, what you hear, what you feel, what you smell, what you taste, and what you see. Allowing yourself to be fully present in your body, and realizing that you are a safe place for yourself, that you have every right to have boundaries and standards and deal breakers, and to be self-protective, and that you have value simply because you're alive. And if other people don't see that value, it doesn't mean that it's not there for you. It simply means that they're not able to see it. And that's on them. And that's sad. taking some time to just acknowledge that there is so much that is good and right with you and good and right in the world. And that it's okay to allow yourself to experience positive or comfortable emotions when you're in pain. It's okay to experience contentment or peace or um, joy or to laugh after you've gone through something really difficult. It doesn't mean that what happened to you isn't hurtful or harmful or that you're somehow okay with it. It doesn't mean any of that. It means these two things can coexist at the same time. Something hurtful happened, but then you're also making that declaration of you're not going to let this ruin your life. And that by bringing some light into your world simply means that it's the conscious choice of moving forward, of, like I said, deciding that that you're not going to let this ruin your life, and fully embracing that, the best revenge is a great life. And even if you're not motivated by revenge, it's still a good goal to set, to just have a really great life, to make this life count. And as different uncomfortable emotions surface, as they will, maybe throughout the evening, maybe throughout now, or throughout the week, gently reminding yourself that it's okay. Like, it's okay to feel how you feel and that you love yourself in this moment. You don't need to wait to love yourself. Like, you're worthy of all of the compassion and love and understanding that you've been given to so many other people your whole life, probably. It's about time to give it to yourself too. So when you're ready, come on back and wiggle your toes and open your eyes. And so thank you guys so much for being here this week. As always, just lots of love to you guys. Thanks, Mystique. You are not alone. You are not crazy, and you can move forward and heal from this. So, and you absolutely can rebuild your life into something that is even better than it was before. Absolutely can. So again, thank you for everything that you guys do in the chat. Thank you for the moderators. You guys are awesome. And we'll see you next week. Okay. Good night.